I've always had a huge love for arcade games. Platformers, maze chasers, shoot 'em ups, fighting games, beat 'em ups, you name it. There's so many great games that came out for the arcades, and it's an era of gaming I so deeply miss. Luckily for us, on the Switch, while it doesn't have a virtual console in name, it sure has received a massive ton of fantastic retro re-releases, including, you guessed it, lots of awesome arcade games. Now, a couple years back, I had put out a video covering some of my favorite arcade games on the Switch at the time, but since then, my list of favorites has grown a lot bigger than what it was before, and I'm ready for the follow-up video. Yes, make sure to grab some pizza and soda, make sure to save some for me, as well as grab a few quarters, as we get ready to dive into more arcade goodness on the Nintendo Switch. Capcom has released a ton of their arcade games for the Switch, across a number of collections. Two of those collections have been the two Capcom arcade stadiums, where each one has 30 or so games available for purchase. Now, these have been a great way to get and play games for insanely cheap, just $1.99 per game. In the second Stadium app, there's two games that I tend to go back to pretty often, and those two games are Mega Man: The Power Battle, and the sequel, Mega Man 2: The Power Fighters. In both games, what Capcom has basically done is cut out the fluff of the old games. There's no platforming to be done in any of them. You just try to defeat boss after boss in order to win the game. Just like the old games though, you can still choose what order to face the bosses in, and Mega Man still has access to his regular stuffs, like his Mega Buster, which he can charge up for attack, and he can also obtain and use special weapons from bosses he defeats. Those special weapons can be super effective against certain bosses, just like the games before too. There is a lot of fun to be had in discovering what might be the best order to take on the bosses. Beyond just Mega Man, there are additional characters you can play as in both games too, and you're also able to select different paths to play at the start, each with their own unique bosses and small stories to experience. So there's actually a fair amount of content here to play through. Another great Capcom arcade game that I tend to revisit a lot on Switch is the unique fighting game called Cyberbots. Now in this game, instead of playing as a traditional fighting game character, like so many other games out there, players actually get to play with mechs, and then proceed to beat the holy hell out of each other in one-on-one combat. Each mech has their own unique style and weapons to use, but the gameplay is very similar to other Capcom fighting games. So while the game does have its own unique mechanics, generally if you played other Capcom fighting games, then you're pretty much good to go and can easily jump into this game and start having fun right away. This game has a lot of good going for it. The battles are fun and chaotic, the sprites are huge and very well animated, and overall, it's a very well polished fighting game. I highly recommend for you to check this out if you're a big fan of fighting games. On the Switch, there's two ways you can get it. You can pick it up via the Capcom Arcade Stadium app for just $1.99, or by picking up the Capcom Fighting Collection. That collection has Cyberbots, but it also has a boatload of other great Capcom fighting games, like the Darkstalkers and Vampire Saviors games, the Hidden Gem, Red Earth, and Hyper Street Fighter II, the Anniversary Edition. The collection is actually what I opted for to get the game, and it's very well done. It's got online play, a ton of options to customize the game, and even has a good museum mode as well. Look, I can truly appreciate a game that just tries to kick your butt. You either get good, or you get gone. Hey, I like easy games too, but sometimes it's nice to be humbled a bit. And what arcade series is great for that? Yep, you guessed it, the Ghost and Goblins series. These action platformers are notorious for their extremely tough gameplay, and the fact you have to go through the game twice to actually beat the game. But they're also recognized for having some great graphics and sound for the time they were released in. It's so rewarding though, to get good at these games, and if you're able to beat them, it's a real feather in your cap. These games are no joke. One of my favorite things I've ever done gaming-wise is actually beating the first Ghosts and Goblins game for the arcade, and I actually did so via the version on Switch. It nearly killed me though. That said, these games beat me down, they raise my blood pressure and all, but I love them so, and I always go back to them for a nice challenge. Via the Capcom Arcade Stadium app on Switch, it's easy to treat or torture myself quickly by loading it up and jumping into these games. The Sega Ages series by M2 is filled with awesome gems from Sega's past, and arguably the single most important release in the series might be the Sega Ages release of Virtua Racing. Home ports had largely been unable to capture the accurate feel of the arcade game, but this version is flawless. You can't find a better way to play this game at home. Here the game is operating at 60 FPS with widescreen support, and the game has support for 8-player multiplayer on a single Switch system. Heck, they even added support for online multiplayer. It's pretty insane what they've done with this release, and no other home version of this game comes close to the Switch version. Now, Virtua Racing is an early 3D arcade racing game, and it's pretty simple looking in its graphics, but the game, even after all these years, is still pretty fun to play, and it's challenging to master, especially for the later 2 courses. It was a staple of arcades back then for good reason, and with the Sega Ages Switch version, it's super easy to experience this classic at its very best. This next entry might be cheating. I'm just going to include the whole collection here, that being the Ray's Arcade Chronology Collection. This was also done by M2, and this is a collection of 3 shoot-'em-up games from Taito's Ray series. It has Rayforce, Raystorm, and Raycrisis. The gameplay is similar across the 3 games. You got a similar shot or cannon just like most shoot-'em-ups, but you're also able to lock onto enemies, kinda like the Panzer Dragoon games, and are able to take out swarms of enemies or deal big damage to bosses with missiles. Mastering this lock-on mechanic is a must, not only for getting high scores, but also for survival in the later stages. Rayforce was the first game in the series, and that's a 2D horizontal shooter. The later 2 games are actually in 3D. Regardless though, all 3 are amazing games in their own right, and they feature fantastic shooting, great levels, and a good challenge. I consider these to be some of the best arcade shoot-'em-up games ever made. Now, I've been a fan of these games for quite some time, and I have home versions of these games in my collection for systems like the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, but the collection here on Switch is simply the best way to experience these games. You got HD versions of the 2 later games, in addition to the OG versions. There's loads of stat tracking gadgets, an absolute massive amount of options to customize the games to your desire, a replay feature that lets you record, save, and view your entire gameplay run, online leaderboards, and so much more. This collection is packed to the brim with stuff, everything you'd need, and then some, and it's a fantastic way to experience these classic games. If you love shoot-'em-ups, then you definitely need to check out this collection and get it for the Switch. I'm a big fan of the Wonder Boy series, and I pretty much like all the games. And when the Wonder Boy Anniversary Collection arrived on Switch, it seemed like a dream come true. This collection contains 21 versions of the 6 games in the series, from the arcade to games from the 8-bit and 16-bit consoles. In that collection, there are 2 arcade games I generally find myself going back to every now and then, and those 2 games are Wonder Boy Monster Land and Wonder Boy in Monster Lair. Wonder Boy Monster Land, also known as Wonder Boy in Monster Land, is an action RPG adventure. Yes, that's something that's very much a gaming rarity in arcade games. In this game, you start out as Wonder Boy, in his boxers, basically without anything on his person, and then you go on a quest to defeat a dragon. It sounds pretty crazy, but luckily though, you'll soon gain a sword, and you'll earn gold from enemies to purchase better equipment and stuff in order to help succeed in your adventure. As you get further into the game, you'll get better and stronger with the stuff you find. It's a really unique game that stands out from other arcade games. I love its style, and there's a boatload of secrets to find within. There's so many ways to earn bonus gold, plus there's lots of secret doors and stuff to find that open up loads of possibilities for the player. It's been a lot of fun on Switch, just searching and discovering what's in game, and using that knowledge to hopefully do better each time I go back and play. Wonder Boy in Monster Lair is also a game that's a bit of a rarity too. It's like a weird mix-up between the first Wonder Boy game and later games with shoot-'em-up and run-and-gun mechanics thrown in. The levels in this game are divided into 2 halves. The first half has Wonder Boy traversing a scrolling level while doing some light platforming and shooting down enemies and collecting fruit, just like the first Wonder Boy game. The second half has Wonder Boy flying through horizontal, scrolling shoot-'em-up style levels. It's a bit of a weird combo, but honestly it works, and the gameplay is a lot of fun, and it's easy to get into. The gameplay is not as depth-driven as some other run-and-gun or shoot-'em-up games, but I think that actually works to its advantage, making this game easier to pick up and play compared to some other arcade games. Definitely check this one out if you can. It is a nice little arcade gem. Early on in the Switch's lifespan, Hamster partnered with Nintendo to do something that has never been done before. That is to re-release classic Nintendo arcade games. We're not talking about a conversion or so, like the old NES games. I mean an actual one-to-one exact port of the original games as they were from back in the day. One of the very first games to arrive via this new endeavor between the two companies was the original Donkey Kong. This is so cool that they did that, as you can now properly experience the classic game at home with the original difficulty and with its original level layout with all 4 original stages included. Now don't get me wrong, I grew up playing the NES version of Donkey Kong to death, but the arcade version is superior in every single way. What also makes this release very intriguing, it's not just a single version of Donkey Kong here. This version on Switch actually includes 3 different versions of the game. The original Japanese release, the later updated one, and the international version. For those unaware, the Japanese and international version of the original Donkey Kong game are quite different from each other. The level order is different, and even the difficulty of the game and how it scales is different in each version of the game. So it's pretty cool that they included these versions here, so everyone has a chance to experience the differences. On top of those 3 versions is the Arcade Archive standard of having a high score mode, a score as many points as you can in 5 minutes caravan mode, and of course, online leaderboards for every mode and version of the game. I'll be honest, I feel like not every Arcade Archives release is worth it, but this one is pretty darn sweet. Another Arcade Archives release that I often go back to on the Switch is vs. Super Mario Bros. Now for the uninformed, you might be saying, oh, this is just Super Mario Bros. From the NES. Really? It isn't. Sure, things start out familiar, but it quickly becomes apparent that things are very different in this game. The levels in vs. Super Mario Bros. Feature a lot of changes from the NES one. For example, a lot of platforms have been made smaller. There's more pit traps. Power-ups have been moved or removed entirely. There's enemies in different locations. And in some cases, brand new levels have completely replaced existing ones. This game is a much harder game now compared to the old NES version, and I really like that. Now it's not as hard as Super Mario Bros. 2, aka the Lost Levels is. It's not that insane in difficulty, but it's a nice middle ground between the two games. Now I'll admit it's a game not for everyone, but if you're like me, and you really love the original Super Mario Bros., and you crave a challenge, then check this one out. It's pretty good. There's one more Nintendo entry in the Arcade Archives series that I want to talk about today. That's the Arcade Archives release of Mario Bros. This is a platformer game where you play as Mario or Luigi, and you gotta bump enemies from below and then kick them to get points. Things quickly ramp up though, as you encounter additional enemies, such as crabs that require 2 hits, fireballs that tend to disrupt your plans, and freezies who can freeze platforms and make things extra slippery. It's a fun and chaotic game, especially in 2-player mode with a friend. Now just like the original Donkey Kong, I played the NES version to death as a kid, but it wasn't until I picked up this release that I realized the arcade version is by far the better version. It's a much more livelier game. There's more animation to all the enemies, and even with Mario and Luigi too. In the NES release, things are much more toned down and simplified. Also cut from the NES release was the enemy introductions. In the arcade version, a demo will play that introduces you to each new enemy when you first encounter them, and it teaches you how to deal with them and take them out. Another big change from the NES release is the difficulty. The NES version starts out really easy, and it takes a good bit for it to finally ramp up in difficulty. Here in the arcade version, the game starts out at a faster pace, with a bit of higher difficulty overall. I really like it, and I think the differences in the arcade game make for a far better game. The whole Galaxian series from Namco is great, but one of my personal favorites from that series is Galaga 88. This game starts off kinda like Galaga, the second game in the series, but features a number of changes beyond a new visual design. There's loads of new enemies, with new flight patterns, the bonus stages, now dubbed Galactic Dancing, are far more animated and varied, and now you have the ability to warp further into the game, as well as be able to start out with 2 ships conjoined together from the get-go. Just like in the original Galaga, if you let a ship be captured and then successfully retrieve it from the enemy, it can be returned to you to join up with your existing ship. And heck, you can even combine up to 3 ships for maximum firepower. This can be risky, considering if things go wrong, you could potentially lose a ship very quickly this way, but it is rewarding if you can pull it off. On Switch, there's 2 ways to play Galaga 88. The first one is through the Arcade Archive series. I say the best way to get it is via the Namco Museum Collection on Switch. This includes 10 other Namco arcade games, and it's often on sale for less than $5 on the eShop. You can also pick it up physically via the Namco Museum Arcade Pack Collection on Switch, which has this and Pac-Man Championship Edition 2 Plus with it. That physical collection is the way I chose to get it on Switch. Now, Centipede is a game that I've always had fondness for, and I'm kinda dating myself here, but Centipede was one of the very first arcade machines I ever played, and that actually was at a movie theater where I watched Jurassic Park as a kid. By that time, the game was already a bit old, and simple compared to other arcade games at the time, but hey, I loved the gameplay, and it just clicked with me. Now, Centipede has been released numerous times over for home consoles, but the releases for the Switch are actually top-notch, and lately my preferred way to play when I don't have access to a proper arcade cabinet. On Switch, you can play this game via 2 ways. First is the Atari Flashback Collection, which has a decent number of arcade games, but also has a massive amount for Atari 2600 and even some 5200 games too, for about 150 games total. These days, analog joysticks do a decent job in helping you to play the game versus the D-pads of controllers of yesteryear, but the Flashback Collection has touchscreen support, so you can control the game in a way that tries to mimic the old trackball. The other way to play is via the Atari 50, the Anniversary Collection. This not only has a ton of arcade games, but a bunch of Atari games for the 2600, 5200, 7200, 8-bit computers, and more, as well as one of the best museum modes in any retro game collection ever. The port of Centipede here is even better, and it still has the touchscreen support, but now the feel and movements using that control scheme are even more accurate. Now, both collections are great, and if you asked me which one to get, I'll always answer both, because they each have value in terms of their games and what they offer. One thing's for sure, when I boot up either collection on the Switch, I'll always play around a Centipede. That game always takes me back to the good old days. The other Atari arcade game that I always go back to on Switch is Black Widow. Now, this is a game I didn't discover until a few years ago or so, but holy cow, this one resonated with me instantly when I started playing it for the first time. Now look at this game. It's crazy. You gotta move with the left stick, shoot with the right, all while trying to avoid contact with enemy bugs and shooting them down for points. Sometimes eggs get placed in your web, you can knock it off for more points before they hatch. It's a game that is so fast and intense that after a few levels, it feels like you're trying to hang off and deal life against the non-stop horde of enemies flying at you, but that makes it so much fun. Now, one of the biggest hurdles I've had while trying to play this game elsewhere in the past was trying to capture that vector glow experience, but both collections on Switch do a pretty good job in their own way to allow players to experience this classic. Now, I can't decide which one I like better. I mean, Flashback's view effect with the vector style graphics, it does pop and it retains clarity, but the Atari 50 collection really emulates that soft glow effect that vector monitors do give off. Either way, it's a fantastic game, I love it to death, and I do recommend you to check it out if you pick up one or both collections on Switch. If I were to create a top 10 list of my favorite arcade games, without a doubt, Puzzle Bobble 2 would be on that list. It's one of my absolute favorites. The game continues on with what the first game offered, with easy to pick up and play bubble blasting gameplay, whether it be in puzzle mode or against the computer or another player. Now you may ask, why do I tend to pick this one versus the many other Puzzle Bobble games out there? Well, first, For me, it's a bit more fleshed out, gameplay-wise compared to the first one, by introducing some new bubbles, like the Spark Bubble, to help vary the gameplay, but it doesn't go overkill with the additions, like some of the later entries. Second, I feel that the puzzle levels in this one are very well designed, and most can be completed rather quickly if you know what to do, which helps to keep up the tempo of the game. Finally, I feel like the soundtrack to this one is top-notch. Holy cow, the music for this game is just so amazing and so joyful. There's so many good tracks. It's an excellent soundtrack all around. Good gameplay, good visuals, good soundtrack. It's a recipe for success, and that's why I keep coming back to this arcade game time and time again. Now on Switch, there's two ways to play. There's the Arcade Archives release that has both the Japanese original game, as well as the international Busted Move version, and of course it has a high score mode and caravan mode, just like the other Arcade Archive releases out there. But my go-to version is actually the Saturn Tribute one on Switch. It's in a collection called Puzzle Bobble 2X, Busted Move 2, Arcade Edition, and Puzzle Bobble 3, Busted Move 3, S Tribute. And yes, that's the full title. They really could have shortened that. This contains the Sega Saturn versions of both the English and Japanese versions of Puzzle Bobble 2 and Puzzle Bobble 3. Now while these are the Sega Saturn versions running on Switch, the games are largely the same as the arcade counterpart. These retain the classic arcade modes to a T, right down to the credit system and all, but they also include some extra content on top of that. Also, this version on Switch contains the 2X version, the updated version of Puzzle Bobble 2 for the arcades, which had new additional levels and such. That's pretty neat, and the Arcade Archives version doesn't have that at all. Honestly, that's a pretty big win for me. That said, the collection of the two Saturn games are emulated pretty well on the Switch. I haven't had any issues with them at all, and they have some additional features like a rewind and slow time options for the cheaters among us, the ability to save at any time, the option for unlimited credits, and more. The only thing I wish it had was online leaderboards, which is the only advantage that the Arcade Archives release has. But hey, it's Puzzle Bobble 2, and the sequel included, and I could play it on the go, which makes me a very happy gamer. And there you go. That's more of my favorite arcade games for the Nintendo Switch. Sorry it took so long to make this follow-up video, but hopefully the wait was worth it. If you guys want another sequel, let me know in the comments down below. I'm always up for talking about more arcade game goodness. Also, don't forget to share what your favorite arcade games for the Switch are in the comments down below. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, it lets me know you appreciate it, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing, I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll catch you on the next video. Welcome back to the channel. I love arcade games. I have a lot of good memories playing them. I was lucky enough that I grew up as a kid during the 90s and witnessed the second renaissance of arcade games and got to experience quite a lot, from the rise of the fighting games to the later era that saw a lot of 3D gaming. Luckily enough, I got to experience some 80s classics too. Fast forward to 2022, and the Nintendo Switch has been blessed with a number of ways to play a boatload of arcade games, from the late 70s all the way into the 2000s. So it's no surprise that I would have a number of these for the console, and I got quite a few favorites. In today's video, I'm going to share with you a selection of my favorite arcade games on the Switch. While you are watching, feel free to share what your favorite arcade games are in the comments down below. I got a lot to talk about, so enough dawdling, grab a quarter and a slice of pizza, and let's dive into some arcade goodness on the Nintendo Switch. If we're going to talk about some arcade games, then of course, I'm going to talk about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection that just came out. Why? Well, because it has two of my favorite beat-em-ups of all time. Yes, it has Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the arcade game from 1989 and Turtles in Time. Turtles was all the rage in the early 90s, from the comics to the TV show, movies, the toys. Oh, I remember the toys. Kinda wish I still kept them. Anyway, the first arcade game captured that spirit in time, and it was a bit mind-blowing as a very young kid to play. 4-player beat-em-up. 4 people playing at once on an arcade cab. Nothing was like that at the time. It blew my mind. The game is a lot of fun, and guess what? It still is. What's cool about the new collection is the ability to play 4-player via online or local multiplayer and be able to relive that classic arcade experience. Seriously, get some friends and play it in 4-player. While it is fun solo, it is a blast in 4-player play. Now, Turtles in Time is the one I have the most experience with. I played it a lot in the arcade. It is objectively the best of the two. It has far improved graphics and gameplay, and for myself, might be the best arcade beat-em-up ever made. Nothing has ever touched it, between the spot-on gameplay and the nostalgia factor for me. Maybe the new Shredder's Revenge game, but hey, that was never in the arcades. This one featured the return of 4-player multiplayer, just like the previous game, and you can experience that again via this collection. It is one of the best arcade experiences you can get on your Switch. If you have nostalgia for the 80s and 90s era of Turtles, make sure to pick up this new collection, as it has these 2 games, plus a slew of console and Game Boy games too. It's a pretty sweet collection. Now I'm going to hop from one collection to another one, and that being Pac-Man Museum Plus. Now I always have had a soft spot for Pac-Man, and that's probably because my late mother was a huge Pac-Man fan. She didn't play a lot of games, but she loved Pac-Man, especially Miss Pac-Man. So I got exposed to those games early on via her. On this collection, there's many ways to get your Pac-Man on. There's one game that I really like. You might be surprised to hear. I really like Super Pac-Man. Now this game was the first true sequel to the original game by Namco, with Miss Pac-Man being Midway's take. Here in Super Pac-Man, Pac-Man now has the ability to grow and supersize, as well as be able to eat a power pellet like normal. You have to collect fruit and keys to open pathways in the maze. The super power-up allows Pac-Man to also bust through doors, so it can be used strategically to get through some tricky parts of the maze. For whatever reason, I've always gravitated towards this game. I'm decently good at it. Each time I play, I'm able to get through many boards at a time without dying, so that's always a plus. I guess for me, it's just an exciting take on the formula without being too crazy or far removed from it. Anyway, I'm glad to see it here as part of the collection with the other Pac-Man games. It's good stuff. Check out the collection if you haven't yet. The SNK 40th Anniversary Collection is a very good collection of arcade and console games from SNK before their famed Neo Geo era. One of the coolest things about the collection is on the Switch, it received a free DLC update that added a really cool light gun game called Beast Busters. You don't see too many light gun games get console ports these days, so it was really cool to see this come out. Beast Busters is a game where you shoot up hordes of zombies left and right. It is a pretty intense game. It was released in the arcades in 1989, so this was right on the cusp of the Neo Geo era, and you can kind of see that in the graphics. Of course, in this version, you have to use the joystick to move the cursor around to simulate the light gun, but hey, it's still fun. It's a treat to see this get released too. This was the first time it ever got a console port, and to see them add it after release, yeah, kudos to them. If you love 80s games, make sure to play it, as well as the many other arcade games in the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection. So Clockwork Aquario is a really interesting entry on this list. It was an arcade game brought back from the dead. It was originally supposed to be released in the arcades, but it never saw an official release. 30 years later, a huge team of passionate people revived the game and finished the game. It just blows my mind. The end result is a really fun arcade game that's easy to pick up. The main gimmick here is being able to pick up and throw your enemies. There are secret bonuses to discover, and it'll take some time for you to maximize those scores. Check it out, it's a lot of fun, especially to experience something that got finished so many years later. Now, if you're curious, I did a full review of the game on the channel. I'll leave a link to that video down below in the description box and the comments down below if you want to check it out. Both Capcom arcade collections are great ways to experience a metric ton of arcade goodness. For today though, I'm going to focus on one really awesome game from the second collection, 3 Wonders is actually a collection of 3 fun arcade games in one package. The first game is a platform run-and-gun game called Midnight Wanderers. This reminds me a bit of the Metal Slug games. Lots of bullets, lots of enemies, lots of ways to die and lose a life. That frantic style from those games is here, but what's cool is this came out long before the Metal Slug series was a thing. The second game is called Chariot, and this is a scrolling shooter featuring characters from the previous game. This one is a blast. It's a pretty good shoot 'em up. I really like it. The final game, and a bit of an odd duck, is Don't Pull. It's a puzzle game that's like the Lolo games on the NES or Pengo. We have to push blocks to crush monsters to advance to the next board. It's a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's fun. 3 Wonders really stood out back in the days of the arcade, and it's really nice to be able to play it on the Switch. Now the next entry, I'm going to cheat a little and just group these following games all together. The Darkstalkers games. What a time to be alive, to have access to the legendary Darkstalker games on modern consoles. There's a few ways to play these games on the Switch. A few were included in the Capcom Arcade Second Stadium, I believe 3 games in the series. My preferred method, though, is via the Capcom Fighting Collection, where just about every arcade release from the Darkstalkers series is included in it. These games are some of my favorite arcade games of all time. The details of the sprite animation blew my mind as a kid, and even as an older adult, it is still impressive to me. The gameplay is ultra smooth too, with crazy over-the-top attacks, and it's just so much faster than other fighting games at the time. It felt like an evolution compared to other arcade games. Here in the Fighting Collection, I'm thankful that I'm able to experience these games at any time I want. And if I'm feeling bold, I can take it online too, and probably lose. But hey, it's all good fun, and I'm so thankful after all these years to have it in one package. Again, what a time to be alive. I talked about Darkstalkers, but if I'm going to talk about some arcade fighting games, I have to talk about Street Fighter. It's a given. Just as excellent as the Capcom Fighting Collection is, make note that the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection is just as good. A massive amount of Street Fighter games in one collection with a load of perks, gallery stuff, online play, etc, etc. My go-to games in this collection are down to the following 2. Street Fighter Alpha 3, the cherry on top of the Alpha series, features a massive roster and refined gameplay. To this day, I think it's one of the best fighting games ever made. It's glorious. When I got this collection, it literally was the first game I went for. The second game was Street Fighter 3, Third Strike, Fight for the Future. In this entry in the Street Fighter 3 series, Capcom got it right. The gameplay, a much better roster than the previous Street Fighter 3 versions. And that parry system, it's not an easy game, it will rough you up, but it's a rewarding arcade game, and I'm glad to experience it with many other Street Fighter games in this collection. It's presented well, and again, it has online gameplay too, if you want to duke it out. Just one more fighting game I'm going to talk about, I promise. Look, fighting games were some of my favorite types of arcade games, so it should be no surprise to see quite a few on this list. I'm just going to sneak this next one in. Samurai Shodown II. This entry in the famed series is considered one of the greatest arcade games of all time. The ability to break weapons, parry attacks, and a really well-rounded roster of characters makes this an excellent fighting game to experience. This one can be enjoyed via a few ways on the Switch, via itself as a separate download, either through the SNK published version, or the Arcade Archives version, or through the Samurai Shodown Neo Geo Collection. We get a bunch of games from the series, 7 in total. That version would be the one I would recommend, mainly because you get a bunch of games at a good price. G-Darius HD is an excellent way to experience an arcade classic. Now it does include the console version, but here, for the purposes of the video, I'm going to focus on the arcade versions. Yes, you heard right, arcade versions. See, what's cool here is that this includes multiple versions of the arcade release. The original version had an updated HD version, version 2, which was an updated release in the arcades with new adjustments, and an HD version of that. I love the gameplay in this one. This is a classic Darius formula, but with 3D visuals. One of my favorite mechanics from this game is the capture ball system that allows you to capture enemies and use them against other enemies and bosses. It allows for some strategy. It ends up being pretty darn fun. It's one of my favorite shoot-'em-ups of all time, and it's great to see this have a good release on the Switch. Now a little bit of a bonus entry to top off the list. Cruis'n Blast on the Switch is a console port of the arcade game. Unlike the others on this list, it doesn't end up being nearly a one-to-one port. There's quite a few changes, additional content, cars and such. That's okay though. The arcade gameplay as a whole is still there, and that's what counts. I remember seeing videos online about the arcade version and being impressed with how fun it looked with its over-the-top gameplay. Fast forward to 2021, and I was blown to see that the Switch was getting a console port. It's not the most advanced racing game, but it is fun, and the console version truly captures that arcade racing experience. This one can be had for cheap too, around 20 bucks or so. So if you like arcade racing, you need to own this. I mean, you can race as a dinosaur or a unicorn in this game. How can you not get it? Anyway, while making this video, I soon realized that yeah, there's a lot more arcade goodness I want to talk about. A lot more. So let me know in the comments. You want to see a follow-up video to this in the future? If you like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, so you never miss the many videos that go live on the channel each and every week. One final reminder too, don't forget to share what are some of your favorite arcade games for the Switch in the comments down below. I'm looking forward to reading those. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time. I love classic arcade games, and plenty of those classics have been re-released on the Switch, but there's been a lot of new games that have come out in recent years that attempt to replicate that style and feel from the past. These are modern games that are easy to hop into and pick up and play, ones that you can play for 5 or 10 minutes, or longer if you prefer, as you try to improve your high scores and times. In the past, I've covered a bunch of these types of games in a previous video, but I'm back again with another round of modern arcade games for the Switch. So let's dive in. Horizon Chase Turbo is a racing game that definitely would feel right at home in the arcades. It's got elements comparable to games like the Outrun series and the Rust series, as well as the Top Gear series. You compete on a huge variety of courses from around the globe while trying to reach first place. The driving mechanics are very easy to understand and pretty straightforward in this one. You get a gas and a brake, as well as 3 nitros to use for extra bursts of speed during a race. There's no gears to shift or to worry about, and guiding your car through a turn is pretty easy to get the feel of, more so than I say a lot of other racing games. In fact, there's a lot of times where if you really know a track and you can time your turn correctly, you can floor your car around a bend and never have to let go of the gas. Now you can't always do that, especially if the turn is sharp, but man is it thrilling when you can do that while also passing 3 cars in a single turn. In each race, there's also additional goals to shoot for, such as collecting all the blue coins scattered around the track. Collecting all these will not only up your first place trophy to the platinum level, but those coins you collect can also unlock additional tracks and such. Besides that, there's other collectibles to be mindful of in each track too. There's red gas canisters, the ones you definitely need to collect, especially in the longer tracks, so you don't run out of fuel, and sometimes there's even extra nitro canisters to collect too. This game has a ton of tracks to race on, each with their own unique flavor and challenges, and there's a ton of cars to unlock and race as too. This is a really fun racing game, one that's easy to hop into, to just play for a few races, or even for an hour or two. Definitely check this one out on the Switch if you're into arcade racing. Some of my favorite arcade games are shoot-'em-ups, and on the Switch, there's been a huge resurgence of shoot-'em-ups, both old and new. One of my favorite modern shoot-em-ups is a game called Andro Dunos II, which is a sequel to an old arcade game that originally came out for the Neo Geo and VS arcade cabinets. Now, looking at the gameplay for Andro Dunos 2, you can tell it would feel right at home if it was released in the arcades back in the day. Visually, it has pixel graphics reminiscent of later Neo Geo and VS games, and it even has a 4:3 aspect ratio. Heck, even the game has the introductive how to play video that you would see on a typical arcade game, especially those old SNK arcade games. While nailing those classic feels is great for the arcade experience, what really stands out is the gameplay, which includes a lot of improvements over the first game. You still have access to a set of weapons that you can cycle through, and you can level them up with power-ups that you obtain, but here in this game, you don't permanently lose the power-up weapon when you perform a hyper shot, nor do you need to charge it up to even do the shot in the first place. Now, the weapon's power does get temporarily knocked down for a bit, but luckily it's only for a few moments. Because of this, you can basically perform the hyper shot more often, which is pretty handy, especially with the amount of enemies the game throws at you, as well as during boss fights. Basically, there's a lot more control in this one, and less holding back this time around. That said, the levels themselves are very well designed, and the boss fights themselves are fantastic, with the later ones really forcing you to switch between weapons quite often to survive or to deal with the enemies. What I like about that is it definitely forces you to balance between the power-ups and to use the majority of the weapons, if not all, so you just don't focus on a single weapon. I was really impressed when playing this one. It's a fantastic shoot 'em up, so well designed from top to bottom. Definitely check this one out when you can. If you're looking for some arcade-style fun, but also craving to play a platformer, then you should definitely check out the Toree series of games. All 3 games are super cheap to get. The MSRP price for each one is just 99 cents. Now I know what you're thinking, that price? There's got to be a catch. It's gotta not be good or something. But trust me though, aside from the short runtime for each game, these are really good platformers, especially for those who love to speedrun games. In each game, the goal is simple. You need to race through each level as fast as you can, while also trying to collect all the stars and collectibles. The gameplay is easy to understand and it's pretty straightforward, which makes it easy for anyone to dive into and play. But to truly get those elusive S ranks, you are really going to need to have some excellent platforming skills. There's even hidden characters to unlock. The first game, Toree 3D, is great, as is the sequel, Toree 2. In addition to those games, there's actually a new game that just came out recently called Toree's Panic Pack. This is more of a compilation or a collection, as it technically has 3 games included. The first one, Toree's Genesis, includes 3 levels inspired by the Sonic Adventure series, while Toree Jumble Jam 2 has 4 additional levels. This time, the levels have a bit more exploration focus to them, as opposed to just simply speeding along. I mean, technically you can still do that, but you'll miss out on a lot of collectibles and secrets. Finally, the pack includes Toree Missions, which is kind of like combining the Toree series with Metal Gear Solid VR missions. In each level, you're tasked with either racing to the end as fast as you can, collecting all the stars in each level, or defeating all the enemies in a level. And this one has a bunch of different challenges here, with varying degrees of difficulty. All in all, it's definitely geared towards those who are veteran players of the Toree games, but it's still worth getting for some arcade platforming fun. The Taiko no Tatsujin series originally came out in the arcades first, and there still are arcade releases to this very day, but there's been many home releases as well in recent years. In the last video, a couple years ago, I talked about Drum & Fun for the Switch, but since then, the game has sadly been delisted. Luckily, there's a new game in this series for the console, and to be honest, it's a much better game than the previous one. You still get access to a wide variety of songs to play in the game itself, over 75 songs or so, but for a few bucks every month, you get access to over 800 additional songs via the Music Pass. Of course, you can buy traditional DLC if you wish, but for $3.99, it's a pretty insane deal to get to play so many songs versus paying the old way. Massive amount of songs aside, the gameplay is better than ever now. It feels much more responsive to play, especially if you're aiming to get those perfect ratings or notes. The The game has a ton of unlockables to earn via the new experience system, with over 400 levels to obtain, as well as a ton of customization options to customize your character. Every time you play in any of the game's modes, you'll gain experience points, so you're constantly getting rewarded in some form, even if you fail a song or challenge. In addition to that, there's a story mode to progress through, various online game modes, and local multiplayer modes, such as the Great Toree War, which is an improved revision of Don vs. Katsu mode from the previous game, and even a 4-player mode called Don-chan Band Mode. It's a much bigger and better game than the former release, and it's absolutely worth getting if you're looking for some arcade rhythm game fun on the Switch. If you're looking for additional arcade rhythm game fun, then another game you should check out for Switch is Samba de Amigo Party Central, a long-awaited sequel to the arcade/Dreamcast game. Your goal here is to move and shake the Joy-Cons to match a series of notes and patterns that are shown on screen as music plays, basically like virtual maracas. If you prefer not to use motion controls, you can play the game entirely with buttons, which I understand some will probably prefer it. Unlike the previous game, with the more focused Latin music soundtrack, the music list now features a larger variety of music, like pop music, rock music, various classics, and even some video game music to boot. One of the things I like about this game compared to others in the genre is that there's lots of fun events that just helps to shake things up a bit. For example, sometimes you need to strike a pose and hold it during a song. Other times you need to jump up and down. Sometimes a roulette will appear, and this will select from a series of random possible events, such as performing high fives, or speeding up a song, or trying to hit home runs during a song. Yeah, it can make for some absolutely crazy moments, but all this really helps to make things interesting during gameplay. Of course, you can turn this random roulette feature off, but I prefer to keep it on. I like the randomness. It keeps it exciting. In addition to the classic main mode, there's local multiplayer for 2 players, online multiplayer for 8 players, and a brand new mode called Streamigo, where you are tasked with gaining followers as you complete various sets of challenges. To top it off, there's a ton of customization and unlockables to earn as you keep playing songs and modes, so you're constantly earning and working towards something when playing. This game goes on sale pretty often too, on the eShop for around 15 to 16 bucks when it is on discount, and even brand new physical copies can be found for around the same price, so definitely keep a lookout for this one. It's a good, inexpensive game to add to your game library. The Puyo Tetris games are great games for those looking for some modern arcade puzzle fun on the Switch. These are crossover games between 2 puzzle game franchises, Puyo and Tetris, and in each one, there's a ton of modes that allow you to play as either of the gameplay styles, or mashups of both at the same time. You can jump in and quickly play a simple marathon mode, or one of the arcade modes, or one of the various challenge modes, and there's lots of local and online multiplayer play options too. Now personally I stick to the arcade stuff, as I'm able to go in and play a few rounds of matches, and I'm good. Both games are kinda interchangeable. The sequel has some additional features, but largely they are very similar, so there's no need to necessarily get both games, but either or is pretty darn cheap to get. Physical copies are cheap for both games, and on the eShop, these games go on sale quite often for very little, so definitely keep a lookout for that if you're interested in picking these games up. Back in 1993, a legendary game called Bakugan arrived in the arcades. It's a bit of a hit, and it's largely considered to be the very first bullet hell game. Since then, we've seen many bullet hell style games come out over the years, and these next 2 games on Switch are a couple of my modern bullet hell favorites. Danamku Unlimited 3 checks off many of the boxes of what I consider to make a good bullet hell game. It's a very flashy game, plenty of bullets flying at you, plenty of firepower to hit them back with good boss battles, and an excellent soundtrack to boot. Now, as crazy as this game looks in its visuals, with all the action going on, it's actually a bit of a beginner-friendly bullet hell game, at least in the easier difficulties. The bullet patterns are a bit easier to read compared to others in the genre. In addition to that, the mechanics of the game are pretty straightforward and easy to understand too. Basically, you have 2 types of attacks, a regular shot and a focused laser shot. Depending on what ship you use, the focused laser shot can have varying degrees of locking onto enemies. Beyond that, there's a game mechanic called the Spirit Raise system. Basically, it means that getting close to bullets can power up your ship. Once fully charged, you can unleash heavy damage to your enemies. In addition, shooting down enemies allows you to collect blue ghost bullets from enemies that can also power you up. Those who are quite experienced in the genre have the option of selecting harder difficulties, as well as a different mode from the main mode called Graze mode. This game is an easy recommend for newer players who want to play a bullet hell game, as well as bullet hell veterans. Crimson Clover shares some similarities with the old arcade shoot-em-up Rayforce, since now everything is ramped up to 11. It's a vertical shooter that features a similar lock-on system, where you're able to lock onto enemies by holding down the lock-on button, and when you let go of the button, you're able to launch missiles at your enemies. You also have the standard shot button, and being a bullet hell game, you're able to do a lot of damage very quickly to enemies with these two types of attacks. That said, the game has some more tricks up its sleeve for players to use. As you defeat enemies, you'll be able to fill a gauge, and when it's filled part way, pressing the bomb button can activate a screen-clearing bomb that not only damages all the enemies on screen, but also momentarily clears up all the bullets. The more you use this in succession, the higher the gauge must be filled in order to be able to use a bomb. If you're able to fill the gauge all the way, then pressing the bomb button will activate Break mode, which grants you a small window of invincibility, while also increasing your firepower, and also allows you to score a ton more points with the increased amount of stars that drop from enemies. If you fill the gauge twice over, you can activate Break mode within Break mode for Double Break mode, for even more firepower and even more opportunities to gain a lot of points fast. This game looks absolutely insane, but it is so addicting to play, trying to master when to use bombs or saving up the gauge for break mode. Basically a balance between survival and getting as many points as you can. The World Explosion version has quite a few modes to play through, including the original mode, Boost mode, which adjusts the game's difficulty to your performance in the game, Unlimited mode for those who crave hardcore difficulty, and Time Attack mode, which is pretty much a 3-minute score as many points as you can caravan mode. This is a fantastic game, and it's honestly one of Switch's best shoot-em-ups out there. Make sure to check this one out. I'm a big fan of arcade sports games. As much as I like the realistic or sim sports style games, I definitely prefer the easy to pick up and play style of simpler sports titles. On Switch, one of my go-to games in this style is Mario Golf Super Rush. Just like the other games in the series, the simple golf gameplay is easy to pick up and play, but there's also enough depth here to keep things interesting, like the various course hazards and the super shots that each character can do. Now at first, the game was a bit light on content, but since then, it has really been fleshed out with a lot of updates, as there is now 11 complete golf courses to play through, apart from the battle courses, and a total of 22 characters to play as. Each course is solid. I don't think there's a bad one at all in this game, though there is a lot less gimmick hazards compared to previous games in the series, but honestly, I kinda like it that way. Too many of those can make it frustrating for the player. That's just my view though. Beyond the traditional golfing, there's other additional modes, like Speed Golf, which has you in a race to see who can get their ball into the hole first, a Battle Golf mode, which is a variation of Speed Golf and more of a closed golf arena, and Target Golf, where players try to land a ball on certain targets on the field. There's local and online multiplayer too for all of the modes, as well as a ranked match mode. Beyond that, the thing I like most about this game though, is the ability to customize everything in regards to your playing. You can play as little as 3 holes, you can choose to start at any hole you wish, the amount of wind during gameplay, the AI difficulty, whether you use special shots or not, whether you take turns to golf, or everyone plays all at once, playing for strokes or points, playing with buttons or motion controls. I think you get the point here. What I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of options here, and it's great for the player. Definitely check this one out if you're craving to play some arcade golf on the Switch. One of the very best arcade-style beat-em-up games to come out in recent years is Streets of Rage 4, the long-awaited sequel in the classic game series. The gameplay in this one is excellent, the combat feels very fast and fluid, and it's a game that's easy to pick up and play for sure, but there's a nice amount of depth here that is sure to please fans of the genre. Each character feels different and has their own style from each other, whether it be their attacks, special moves, or abilities. Plus, there's plenty of characters to choose from, especially after unlocking the secret characters. Once you beat the main story mode, other modes open up like Arcade Mode, where you have 1 credit to try to beat the game, a Boss Rush mode, a Survival mode, as well as a Battle mode, where you can face off against another player. There's local multiplayer for up to 4 players, and online multiplayer for 2 as well. This game has a lot of content and replayability. I also want to say, it's a pretty good looking game too. I love the comic book style that the game has, and the soundtrack is pretty awesome too. It's an excellent beat 'em up game, and if you like these types of games, but for some reason have yet to play this one yet, then do make it a point to pick it up sometime. It's totally worth playing. And there you go. That's some modern arcade goodness for the Switch. Like I said before in the past, it's great that there's been a lot of classic game re-releases, especially for arcade stuff, but it's also a good thing that there's newer games around to help keep that arcade spirit alive. Do you have any modern arcade-like games that you really like? If you do, let me know in the comments down below. But anyway, that's all for me today. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll catch you on the next video. Welcome back to the channel. Gaming in the arcade has to be some of my favorite gaming memories from yesteryear. The Switch has made it possible to easily relive those days again. There's a ton of classic arcade goodness on the system via single releases or through the many collections out there. The hybrid console has you covered either way. That all said, there's a ton of modern arcade games that have come out on the system too. There's games from famous names and franchises that are continuing on in modern sequels, or modern games that aim to capture the feel and style of arcade gaming from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Yes, the arcade still very much lives on, so make sure to hang on and subscribe to the channel as I share with you some of my favorite modern arcade games that can be found on the Nintendo Switch. One of my favorite arcade games of all time is Turtles in Time from Konami. It's such a classic. There's some tight gameplay, loads of nods to different parts of the TMNT franchise, and of course, excellent 4-player co-op multiplayer play. If you were able to gather 3 other players to play with you, a 4-player session at the arcade cabinet of Turtles in Time was one of the best gaming experiences you could have. For years and years, gamers have been hoping for a proper sequel, and over the years, we have seen some half-hearted tries and attempts, but enter Shredder's Revenge. This game got it right. This beat-em-up has some of the best combat gameplay in the genre, with extensive ways to attack and combo, but still remain easy to pick up and play. It has a bunch of characters to play as that each feel different. It even includes the option to play as April, Casey, and Splinter, in addition to the 4 main turtles. On top of it all, it comes with drop-in and drop-out 6-player co-op play, and that is the cherry on top with the excellent gameplay that just takes this arcade-like beat-em-up to the next level. Yes, this is legit. It checks all the boxes gamers wanted in a modern arcade beat-em-up Turtles game, and it might very well exceed what Turtles in Time was. It is one I highly recommend on any console it is on, but of course, I love it on the Switch. I love racing games, and arcade-like racing games are some of my favorite ones. The Cruis'n series in the arcades were awesome, filled with some great tracks and some over-the-top racing. Years later, a new entry in the series appeared, Cruis'n Blast, and this one got ported to the Switch. Cruis'n Blast takes the over-the-top racing to the extreme with some utterly ridiculous and insane racing moments, with dinosaurs, tracks that are literally falling apart as you race, and even UFOs. You can even race as a freaking unicorn. This game is not a complex game at all. You got a brake, gas, and directional stick to move, and that's all you need to know to just enter into some good arcade racing fun. They kept the mechanics simple, and it honestly works better for it. Multiplayer is there too. I remember the 90s arcade machines that would hook up and allow you to race others? Well, there's 4-player split-screen play that allows you to relive those days. This game is such a blast. I mean, it is in the name, but it's one of those games that anyone can join in and get enjoyment out of from out of the gate. Another modern arcade racing game on the Switch is Hotshot Racing. Now this one pays tribute to the very early 3D arcade racing games with its look and style. Simple 3D aside, the game is silky smooth, running at 60 FPS. In this game, it's all about mastering the drift in order to get the most optimal times and win those races. That means taking the turns as smooth as you can, catching boost charges, and of course, properly using your boost. This game has a bit more meat on the bone in terms of racing modes. There's Grand Prix and Time Trial for classic arcade experience, but there's also other game modes like Drive and Explode. Where Cruising Blast was all about the thrill, Hotshot Racing provides more of a technical arcade racing experience. Both games though, I highly recommend for the Switch. The next game is a much newer game than most games on this list. In fact, it's so new, it doesn't come out until Tuesday of this week. Now I've been able to give Puzzle Bobble Every Bubble a go thanks to NN Games prior to release, and I have loved it so far. It's the game that actually gave me the idea for this very video. Now, the Puzzle Bobble series is a spin-off series from Bubble Bobble that originally got started in the arcades. It has Bub and Bob popping bubbles with matching bubbles that they shoot from the machine. Players can choose which direction to fire, and bubbles will attach themselves to wherever they land. Match 3 or more of the same color, and they will pop. Often, especially in the later entries, there are other types of bubbles that can activate by popping bubbles around them to cause explosions, destroy all bubbles of the same color, create chain reactions, and more. Puzzle Bobble Every Bubble attempts to recapture those early days with plenty of Puzzle Bobble goodness. There's tons of stages to play through in the story mode with the classic gameplay you know and love, plus EX versions of every stage you can unlock as you get 3 stars on each stage in each area of the map. The game is just as fun as the arcade games were. Multiplayer is here too. In the story mode, you can team with up to 4 other players on the same Switch as you take on stages and eventually aim to take down the Baron. Don't have friends? You can even add computer-controlled characters to play with you to try to bust those bubbles as fast as you can. Of course, there is versus mode too, if you want to challenge your bubble popping skills with others. On top of it all, there's yet another mode, the Puzzle Bobble vs Space Invaders mode, that has you trying to pop rows of aliens trapped in bubbles as fast as you can before they take you out. It's a nice nod and tribute to another of Taito's famous games. This is probably the best Puzzle Bobble game in decades. Hands down, I highly recommend this one when it comes out later this week if you're looking for a good arcade puzzler on the Switch. One of the heavy hitters for arcades in the 90s was SNK and their Metal Slug series. With over-the-top run-and-gun action and a gazillion bullets and a bit of humor, and at times being able to use some awesome vehicles too, the series was, and still is, a treat to play. Mighty Goose, published by Playism, is a game that is more than inspired by the Metal Slug series. Instead of a soldier, you take control of Mighty Goose and don some armor to kick the Void King and his minions' butts. Lots of intense shooting, lots of fun levels and bosses to face, and of course, various war vehicles to use to bring the pain. The game is a modern successor to the Metal Slug series, just with a goose. If it came out in the 90s, it would be remembered as one of the greatest arcade games for sure. I did review this game on the channel, so if you want a more in-depth look of what the game is about, make sure to check out the video review, but in short, I think the game is a must-own. It's one of my favorite indie games ever, and certainly captures the arcade spirit. Since we're at the halfway point of the video, take a moment to post down in the comments what are some of your favorite modern arcade games. I'm looking forward to reading those comments. Donut Dodo takes inspiration from early 80s classics and attempts to play just like it was an arcade game set in the early 80s. including elements from different single-screen arcade games like Donkey Kong and Popeye. It feels like a lost game that came from that era. In this game, you take control of Billy Baker Beans as he tries to collect the donuts while trying to avoid Donut Dodo's attacks and his minions. After collecting all the smaller donuts on the stage, you gotta nab the big one to complete the stage. I like how each board feels different from each other and includes a few different gimmicks for each one to spice things up. It's an addicting little game that's all about mastering the stages and getting that high score. Best of all, this game is cheap. It's only $5 at MSRP, so it makes for a good pickup for gamers on the cheap. Ninja Jaja Maru, The Great Yokai Battle, is a modern entry in the Jaja Maru-kun series that takes what made the original game so popular in Japanese arcades back in the 80s and gives it some nice modern touches. Now, it does play very similar to the original game. You jump and shoot while jumping through platforms in single-screen stages while trying to eliminate every enemy in each stage. Now, what it does do different is it allows you to play as various characters you unlock, each with different stats and attacks. There's a ton of them to unlock, including other unlockables you can earn in the game. There's a lot of neat secrets to discover throughout the stages as you aim for the high score. The game even features 2-player co-op. It's a lot of fun, and I argue it's the best game in the entire series, with addictive gameplay that's perfect for short bursts or long game sessions. Check this one out, and Donut Dodo, if you're a fan of the 80s era of arcade gaming. Super Hiking League DX is a modern arcade-like game where you race against another hiker, be it a computer-controlled hiker or another player, while trying to climb and swing your way as fast as you can in order to nab the gem in each stage. It's easy to play, you jump, have an attack button and a rope button, and within a minute or two, you'll have the mechanics down. There's different characters to play as, plenty of stages to play through and unlock, and plenty of modes to enjoy. Just like Donut Dodo, this is a $5 game as well, another solid pickup for those looking for arcade fun on the cheap. The music game genre can trace its roots back to the arcades, particularly the late 90s to early 2000s era. The first Taiko no Tatsujin game came out in 2001, and the series is still going to this very day. The Switch has been blessed with 2 excellent games from the main series, in addition to some spin-off titles. They all retain the same easy-to-understand and play drumming fun with loads of songs to play, but are also filled with various minigame multiplayer modes that allow others to join in the fun. They are packed to the brim with content, and they are some of the best arcade fun you can have on the system without a doubt. Now, I can't do this video and not include a shooter of some sorts. I mean, the shoot-'em-up genre was born in the arcades, and of course, there's many modern arcade shoot-'em-ups coming out on the Switch and other consoles to this very day. Now, my favorite modern arcade shooter on the Switch has to be Cotton Fantasy. It's a horizontal shooter and just might be the best one in the Cotton series. Fun, fantastic stages with excellent gameplay are highlights, but what makes this game shine is the amount of variety. There's a ton of different characters to play as, each with very different mechanics and play styles. On top of that, there's stages to unlock, and each time you play, you can choose what stages to play and what order you want to play them in. Lots of shoot-'em-ups are replayable by nature, but few do it with the amount of variety that Cotton Fantasy has. I love and I miss the arcades, but it's a good thing that there are modern games that are keeping the arcade spirit alive. Now, if you're looking for some arcade classics on Switch, well, I got you covered. I made a video covering some of my favorite classic arcade games on the console. I'll leave a link to that down below for you to check out, in addition to some other videos to check out if you're looking for some more arcade fun on the Switch. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to click that subscribe button, as I put out new videos each and every week, and you definitely don't want to miss a single one. Thank you so much for the support. Shout out to my Patreon and channel members for continuing to support this channel too. Much appreciated. But for now, that's all from me today. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time.